Tonight we're going to talk about Dukkha, which is usually translated as suffering. And so we'll start out our journey into suffering by listening to a song by La Sarmiento about Dukkha.
So due to the recession, I didn't have any money for some backup doo-wop people, so I'm going to kind of do this on my own. So the Pali word for suffering is dukkha, and you'll find that happening in this song.
Yep. What did it do? That wasn't very nice. It's playing picture in picture. No, I don't want it to do that. Let's try this again. Oh well, technical difficulties.
It goes along with the topic.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's exactly what the problem is.
The topic. Oh, the topic.
There we go. I'll put the
So due to the
video out
recession,
here.
I didn't have any money for some backup doo-wop people, so I'm going to kind of do this on my own. So the Pali word for suffering is dukkha, and you'll find that happening in this song as well. So, dukkha, dukkha, down, doobie, doo, down, down. Dukkha, dukkha, down, doobie, doo, down, down. Dukkha, dukkha, down, doobie, doo, down, down. Waking up is hard to do. Don't take my pain away from me. Let me live my life in misery. 'Cause if it goes, then I'll be blue. 'Cause waking up is hard to do. I love it when my mind is tight, and it keeps me up through the night. Come on, Buddha, it's just you. 'Cause waking up is hard to do. They say that waking up is hard to do. Why just one arrow when there can be two? Don't say my suffering can end. Instead of waking up, I wanna be a couch potato again. I beg of you, just let me cry. Wise effort, I don't wanna try. Come on, Buddha, get a clue. 'Cause waking up is hard to do. Doobie doo down down. Dukkha dukkha down, doobie doo down down. Dukkha dukkha down, doobie doo down down. Waking up is hard to do.
That was worth the technical difficulties. A Dharma teacher from Washington, D.C., a friend of Sherry's. So, anyway, so I wanted to talk about Dukkha, and Law has introduced the subject well. So usually Dukkha is translated as suffering, and it's the first noble truth, or first holy truth, as Tai likes to call it. But actually, it means something more complex than just suffering. And so I took a little section. There's this wonderful Tibetan dictionary called the Illuminator that has all this interesting commentary in it. So I'm going to read this from about the word dukkha. The term has frequently been translated as suffering, especially in Buddhist usage, but that is only a small portion of the meaning. The Sanskrit dukkha is the direct opposite of the Sanskrit sukha. The Sanskrit dukkha means the bad side of things. It is an all-inclusive term that is used to point to a situation that has gone wrong, has nothing right about it. The Sanskrit sukha, on the other hand, means the good side of things, and it is an all-inclusive term that is used to point to a situation that has gone well and has nothing wrong with it. These two words were used in ancient India and are still used frequently today in India, both for spiritual and ordinary talk. The particular context will convey the particular shade of meaning, but note again that both terms are generic terms for things being bad or good, respectively, and are not used to mean specific types of badness or goodness. The Buddha took the term dukkha and used it generally in much the same way as Hindus. Both speak of samsara, which is the wheel, the circle of our ordinary existence, and both speak of it as being dukkha. Both of them are making the statement that samsara is unsatisfactory. However, the Buddha was very detailed in his presentation of what samsara means and just exactly how it is dukkha. Among other things, he joined samsara and dukkha to the operation of the mind and karma. When the Buddha spoke of samsara being dukkha, he did not mean that cyclic existence is suffering. He meant that it is unsatisfactory. He meant that it is all wrong. A state that just never works right is never sukha. This is a very important distinction. If we translate dukkha as suffering, we miss the point that it is more than either suffering or not suffering, both of which are states experienced within the overall unsatisfactory state of cyclic existence. So some people say that the better translation then is unsatisfactoriness. Just not right. Things aren't right. And one metaphor that they use in the teachings that I think is, I kind of like, is that it's like a cartwheel where the axle is not on center, right? So you're riding along in this cart, but your cartwheels are made so that the axle isn't in exact center, so always there's an up and down motion to the cart. It's never smooth, it's never easy, it's just bumpy all the time. It's up and down all the time. Mingyur Rinpoche, my Tibetan teacher, likes to talk about life being like a stock market. It's always up and down. Dukkha embraces the entire spectrum of conditions, ranging from something as simple as an itch to more traumatic experiences of chronic pain or mortal illness. And so there's two different ways that they divide, in the teachings, there's two different ways that they divide categories of dukkha, but I think the one I want to talk about most today is pretty simple, and that's the division between self-created suffering and natural suffering. And so, I guess I want to talk about both of them. So, self-created suffering Thai likes to talk about the Buddha's teachings about the second arrow. People know that teaching. So the idea is that you imagine, the Buddha was pretty direct in his parables. So you imagine that you've been struck by an arrow and it really hurts, right? And then if you're struck by another arrow in exactly the same place, that's hurt squared, right? And so what he talks about as being the second arrow is that in which we all experience when we have some pain, it's the moment when we have some pain and our mind is running off to imagine some illness that we have, and we're trying to figure out, what should I call the doctor? Should I not call the doctor? Is this something I should worry about? Is this something I shouldn't worry about? That's all second arrow. That's all self-created suffering. That's all added suffering that we are adding on to the natural sufferings of life. And our practice is really pretty good at helping us with self-created suffering. So we find that as we do meditation practice, any kind of meditation practice, we have more ability to not get lost in the proliferation of thoughts that happens for all of us when we suffer. And so when we don't get lost, the second interim will be happening, but we're not as identified with it, and it's not as much of a problem for us. Because it really only becomes a problem when we identify with it. We think all those thoughts are real, all those thoughts are ours. But we also have natural suffering. So the actual pain that these thoughts may be proliferating about, for me it's lately been, I have a problem with dry eye. And so my eyes hurt, and then I worry. So, but the actual pain or discomfort of the dry eyes, that's natural suffering. I'm not going to be able to fix that, make that go away by just understanding that it's not, that by just breaking down the proliferation of thoughts. We're still, the classic categories of natural suffering are birth, old age, sickness, and death. And but Mingyur Rinpoche points out that it also includes things like earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes and all the kinds of things that actually are real suffering, but we have no control over, that are not a product of our mental proliferations. And what's interesting to me about the Buddha's teachings is that when he talks about dukkha, he's talking about both of them. So his promise in the Four Noble Truths that we have suffering, we have a cause of suffering. If we can stop the cause, suffering will end. So that's the third noble truth, the cessation. And here's the path to end the cause. So that's apparently a classical presentation that they did in ancient India when they were talking about how to heal illness. Is you have an illness, you identify what the illness is, you identify what the cause is. If you remove the cause, you can end the illness. And that's what the Four Noble Truths are doing. But he's not saying that it just ends self-created suffering. We're used to, I think in the West we're really used to thinking that that's like our objective in these personal growth practices, because we're really influenced by psychological traditions. So, if we just want to be happy by stopping all of our neuroses, like Freud taught us. And but the Buddha's promise is actually bigger than that. That we can end all of suffering, even self-created, even the natural sufferings, through these practices, which is pretty radical. Not sure I fully believe it. I mean, you get a little taste of it because as you get more control over your mind, it is possible. I have done it a little bit, but I know other people who have done it more. It is possible to be able to be with pain without freaking out. To be able to drill down into the pain in a way that allows you to be present to the pain without it hurting. So I think that I can see some possibility there, but it's a pretty radical promise. So the other categorization of suffering is a threefold one. The first kind of suffering in the second category is what they call dukkha, which, as you might think, is actually, that's what we call suffering, right? That's really when you have pain, when you have emotional pain, when there's something bad happening, that's dukkha. But you might have noticed in that first reading from the Illuminator, that dukkha, it really applies to all of our experience in ordinary life in samsara. And so even happiness is tinged with dukkha. And so the second category of dukkha is what they call the dukkha of change. And that has to do with what happens when we're happy, is that we know that every happiness that we have in our ordinary life is going to end. There's like the 5 contemplations where we talk about how everything that we love, everybody we love is going to go away. You know, everything that we care about is going to change. And because of that, we hang on to the things that make us happy. And we look for them. We're always seeking after and running after things that make us happy. And that's the second kind of dukkha, because that running after things keeps us from being settled and present. And I think that's kind of the ultimate opportunity for happiness in these teachings, is to really become settled and present and be able to experience whatever is happening from that place that's bigger than our small self, and that's the place that can experience everything. But we usually, when we're happy, it's always tinged with this, oh my God, this is going to go away piece, and that's the unsatisfactoriness of change, or the dukkha of change. And there's another kind of dukkha in that group that I'm not sure I fully understand, called pervasive suffering. Part of the teachings are that everything in ordinary life is tinged with suffering, as I said. And I think that pervasive suffering is really about some way of describing what happens when we get lost in experience. So the metaphor that they often use is that pervasive suffering is very subtle, and the teachings would say that it's hard for us to experience that. But they say that for a bodhisattva, the sensation of an eyelash in the palm of their hand is like for us the sensation of an eyelash in our eye. Mm-hmm. And so it has something to do with the way that we experience all of our experience. But for me, I think the essential piece about this is that is to look at our experience, and this is the kind of the way I'm relating to it in my own practice, is to look at our experience and really see the ways in which there's no reliable happiness to be found in our ordinary lives. There's no permanent happiness to be found in our ordinary lives. It's always going to be up and down. And I think the importance of that in this philosophical structure is that when we can see that it's not possible to find permanent happiness in our everyday lives, we can let go of the effort to do that. And we can seek permanent happiness where the Buddha says we can find it, which is through the practices that the Buddha teaches, that he says is a path that will take us to this lasting happiness, to sukha. And so there's a way in which the one aspect, an interesting aspect for me of seeing the way in which ordinary life is unsatisfactory, is that it energizes and inspires us to let go of our efforts to make our lives perfect. I mean, I think there was this, I talked to Becca about this, there's this wonderful story there's a book called Words of My Perfect Teacher, an old Tibetan book, that is full of really interesting stories. So there's this really interesting story about a meditator living in a cave, as they are wont to do on the Himalayan peninsula in Tibet. And he's in this cave for years, and every time he goes out of the cave to pee, there's a thorn bush right next to the entrance of the cave that catches his robe. And it's really annoying. And so every time he walks out of the cave to go pee, he says, I got to cut down that thorn bush. And then every time he comes back to the cave, he thinks to himself, well, I don't know whether I'm ever going to come out of that cave again. Life is uncertain. So I might as well just leave it there. And, you know, he spends his whole retreat in the cave going in and out, and he never cuts down the thorn bush. And in the words of my perfect teacher, that's taught as a parable about impermanence, in that we may not come out of the cave. But when I reflected on it, it seemed to me, or it struck me as more of an interesting, you know, this person had this like thing that really annoyed him. And what I always do when I have something that really annoys me is I try and fix it. And for any one thing, that's totally fine. But I spend almost my whole life trying to fix all the little annoyances that are endless. You know, we're surrounded by little annoyances. And we just bought a bike rack, and we have a new car, and it has one of those fancy backup beeping things that when you get close to something behind you will tell you that you're about to hit it. So the bike rack triggers triggers the beeping thing. So we're trying to decide, well, do we take it back? And that's exactly what it is. It's like that's like the thorn bush. You know, you get lost trying to fix all these things. And I think what the teachings are leading us to is that the ultimate happiness, they're trying to help us realize that the ultimate happiness isn't going to come by anything we do with our ordinary life experience. We're not going to be able to fix it. So if we can't fix our ordinary life experience, then we can direct our time and attention to settling back into who we truly are, to our true home, as Ty likes to call it. Because that's where lasting happiness is offered as a possibility. So that's what I wanted to say about dukkha. Let me see if I have anything else that I wrote down here that'd be good to say, but no. Time to just quit anyway. So, time to quit anyway. So I'd love to hear what you all think.